Flames Licking Fever is the fifth full-length album from Deathrite, a Leipzig, Germany-based death metal punk band. And exactly what do I mean by death metal punk? I would say this band started out as something that was closer to kind of the heavier crossover that was coming out of bands like Black Breath and Trap Them. It's kind of crust core, and they went somewhere with it over time, eventually getting signed to, I believe, Century Media for a record, and they weren't exactly as big as a band like Mammoth Grinder, but their sound was kind of moving in a similar direction as they started to incorporate elements of death metal over time. A couple of years ago, they released an EP called Delirium back in 2022, and that made it a little bit more clear what they were all about. Their sound was certainly death metal influenced, but it was coming from a place where it was maybe something more like atmospheric death metal, and I mean maybe the progressive rock kind of touched side of Morbus Chron or Tribulation. They were certainly hitting upon the headier version of what Swedish metal was doing in the early 2010s, but they still had that kind of crust punk and extreme punk feeling to it. So the way they developed over the years was in leaps rather than steps, and they weren't about iterating upon the same thing over and over beyond kind of the step from their first and second full length, which the parody was there. It made a lot of sense. It was just heavier death metal sounding crust. So beyond that point and where we are now is something that is better realizing what they were trying to do back in 2022 and making a full album of it. It's a pretty exciting record, and what we'll do is we'll listen to a clip here, and then I'll try to explain it in a way that it makes clearer sense what this thing is. So as I go through this review, I'm talking about the fact that there are members of Abyssus, a black death metal band, and Kelman, and I mentioned Obnoxious Youth and Voivod and Morbus Chron. You're getting the sense that this record is either all over the place or there's some connection between all these things. And I would say there's kind of a psychedelic death metal touch to this record, but it's also a death crust record at the same time. It's sort of a death punk record. There's no other way to put it. And while I really do like death metal and crust punk when they're mixed, it's never very original. I think that the interesting thing about this record is that it's not exactly fully doing one thing or the other. It's morphing between all of these ideas to get out interesting, often atmospheric songs, which I would describe as something that dances downward in a spiral. It's more of the motion of the song and the sensation of it circling it down the drain that makes a lot of it very interesting. And so that there's metal punk that did that in the past. I mean, certainly Amoebics had that sort of doomed feeling to a lot of their work, but in this case, this is something very different, and it involves a really bright production values, very strong guitar sound, and a unique vocalist who can push out a lot of different emotion in a similar register. So it makes for an album it's a pretty stunning listen. It's exciting. It's fast, it's slow, it's heavy, it's otherwise, so it's entertaining as that type of music. I think trying to sum it up, it just becomes more and more difficult as you know the general rub of the whole record and the journey that it takes you on. I would say the second half is decidedly a little bit different from the opening. The opening is more dramatic. They're sort of dancing through those pieces that are more, they're kicked in a certain way. That's all, a lot of very specific references I could come up with, but the overall effect is that every song really hits on this record for me, and the more I listened to it, I just felt there was something special about it. Even though it's not doing one or the other thing particularly new, it's not something you've never heard before, except for its general composition and the way that those elements meld together into a fairly original sound. So they've been at work on this sound for quite some time, at least 4 or 5 years. It feels like since at least 2018, and this is where I feel like they've achieved something that sets the bar. It sets something as something special, where there's still that hardcore punk in there. There's still that interest in death metal there, but it's all churning together in a way that is decidedly theirs and gets their whole gig across in a very strong way. So I like this record quite a bit. This is a high recommendation for me. It doesn't quite go above and beyond all expectations, because they did have that EP before that kind of set this in stone in some ways, but I think that the actual songcraft, the flow of the album in general is pretty brilliant as a step beyond what they've done in the past. So really interesting to see how this band has developed over the years, and I thought it's a pretty strong record. Check it out for yourself, see if it's your thing. Go ahead and check it out today. It released on October 18th. And read my review for maybe a little bit more coherent thoughts on what this thing is and how it plays out.